Welcome back to the Make Heaven Crowded podcast. Today, we are doing a deep dive into Genesis chapter 9.
Oh, yeah.
And
It's a big one.
it is a big one. This is sort of the aftermath of the flood and kind of resetting creation in a lot of ways.
Yeah, this is where we see God's plan for humanity start to unfold after the reset.
Yeah. So what does that look like?
Well, it begins with a blessing.
Okay.
In the very first verse, God blesses Noah and his sons, commands them to be fruitful and multiply, just as he did with Adam and Eve back in Genesis 1.
So even after all the flood and everything, God still wants humanity to just go and flourish.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about it. God could have chosen to start over with a completely different creation, but instead, he reaffirms his commitment to humanity.
Yeah. That's a very powerful reminder of God's faithfulness.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it does raise some questions for some people. Why would God emphasize procreation after such a catastrophic event?
Right.
Like, wouldn't that be the last thing on your mind?
That's a valid point.
Yeah.
But it all goes back to the heart of God's purpose for humanity.
Okay.
He created us to be in a relationship with him and with each other, to cultivate the earth and to reflect his image.
Right.
And continuing the human lineage is essential to that purpose.
Yeah, and also even beyond that, spreading the gospel, making disciples of all nations, kind of filling the earth with people who are following God.
That's a theme that echoes throughout the Bible.
Exactly.
Now in verses 2 and 3, we see a shift in the human-animal relationship.
Okay.
Animals now fear humans, which suggests a change in the natural order, possibly as a consequence of sin.
Yeah, it seems like before the flood, the animals and humans were living in harmony, and now suddenly there's this fear.
Right. It almost feels like a veil has been lifted, revealing a new reality where predation and hunting become part of the post-flood world.
Yeah, and then God even gives permission for humans to eat meat in verse 3, which I always thought was kind of a departure from the initial vegetarian diet in Genesis 1.
Right. It's interesting. Some scholars suggest that change might be related to the altered environment after the flood.
Okay.
Maybe certain plants were no longer available,
Right.
or the need for protein became more critical for survival.
Interesting.
But even with the permission to eat meat, God puts a very specific restriction in place.
Yeah.
No consuming blood.
Right, verse 4.
Yeah, this prohibition highlights a key concept in the Bible. Blood represents life. It's sacred and not to be taken lightly.
And we see that all throughout the Bible.
Yes, this restriction foreshadows the sacrifice of Christ and the idea that atonement, the reconciliation between God and humanity, comes through the shedding of blood.
So it's not just about what you eat, it's a much deeper spiritual principle.
Exactly. And that theme continues in verses 5 and 6, where we encounter the establishment of capital punishment.
Okay.
God makes it clear that murder is a grave offense because it defiles the image of God within each human being.
And that's a big conversation.
Right.
I know a lot of people will say, thou shalt not kill.
Right.
But obviously there's different types of killing.
Yeah, it's important to remember that the Bible is dealing with complex concepts here, while taking a human life is always a serious matter. The Hebrew language makes a distinction between unlawful killing, murder, and the lawful execution of justice.
So it's not a contradiction.
Right.
It's just a nuanced understanding of different types of killing.
Exactly.
And then God reiterates the command to be fruitful and multiply in verse 7. He really wants humanity to just go and fill the earth.
There's a sense of urgency and purpose. There isn't there?
Yeah.
Even after the flood, God's plan for humanity remains focused on growth, flourishing, and responsible stewardship of the world. It reminds me of the parable of the talents. We are entrusted with so much.
Yeah.
And we're called to use those gifts to their fullest potential.
Yeah. And with all this responsibility,
Yes.
we need to understand our relationship with God.
And that's where the covenant comes in.
Okay, so this is the first explicit covenant in the Bible, which is a pretty big deal. What does that mean?
The Hebrew word for covenant is beret, and it implies a binding agreement between two parties.
Okay.
In this case, it's between God and all of humanity, represented by Noah and his descendants.
So this isn't just a promise to Noah, this is a promise to all of humanity.
It's a testament to God's faithfulness and his enduring commitment to his creation.
That's pretty amazing. And so to seal that covenant, God gives a sign.
He does, and what a sign it is.
Okay, let's take a pause there, and we'll come back and we'll talk about this sign as more about what happens in Genesis 9.
Sounds good. All right, so we're back, and we were talking about that sign to seal the covenant.
No, why is it?
So in verses 11 and 12, God promises never again to destroy the earth with a flood, And as a visible reminder of this promise,
Okay.
he gives us the rainbow.
The rainbow, it's so beautiful.
Isn't it?
Yeah, such a great sight.
And it makes you think,
Yeah.
when you see a rainbow after a storm,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a visual reminder that even in the darkest times,
Yeah.
God's promises hold true.
Yeah, and this image of this bow, which is a weapon,
Right.
being turned away from the earth, it really emphasizes peace and reconciliation.
It really does. And that grace extends to all of creation, not just humanity.
That's a good point.
Remember, this covenant is with every living creature.
It reminds us that we need to care for creation.
Yes, we have a responsibility to care for the earth and all its inhabitants, just as God cares for us.
All right, so we've got this beautiful covenant sealed with a rainbow.
Yes.
What happens next?
Well, things take a bit of a turn.
Okay.
We move from this grand sweeping covenant to a more intimate family drama.
Okay.
It starts with the introduction of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Okay.
And there's a seemingly insignificant detail
Okay.
that Ham is the father of Canaan.
Okay. And why is that detail so important?
Well, it foreshadows what's to come.
All right.
Because in the very next scene, Noah plants a vineyard, makes wine drinks too much, and ends up, let's just say uncovered in his tent.
Yeah. This part of the story always makes me laugh a little bit.
It is kind of funny.
Here's this guy, Noah. He survived the flood.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be this righteous guy,
You're right.
and he's getting drunk and naked in his tent.
Yeah.
It just seems so out of character.
Well, it does raise some questions.
Yeah.
Some scholars suggest that Noah might not have fully understood the effects of fermentation at that time. But regardless of the specifics, I think this story highlights the reality that even those closest to God can stumble.
Yeah.
It's a sobering reminder that we're all human prone to making mistakes, even after experiencing God's grace and deliverance. We're not immune to temptation.
We are not.
And it reinforces the need for God's constant grace,
Yeah.
forgiveness in our lives.
So Ham sees his father in this state,
Yes.
goes and tells his brothers. What was wrong with that?
Well, the Bible doesn't explicitly state Ham's intentions,
Okay.
which has led to various interpretations.
Right.
Some believe he mocked his father, while others suggest it might have been a more serious transgression.
Okay.
But regardless, his actions demonstrate a blatant lack of respect for his father, which violates the commandment to honor one's parents.
So we see the difference between Ham's actions
Yes.
and the actions of Shem and Japheth,
Exactly.
who try to protect their father's dignity.
Right, and this leads to the pronouncements in verses 24 through 27, where Noah, upon waking up, curses Canaan, Ham's son.
Why Canaan?
Why not Ham, right?
Yeah.
It's a question that has puzzled many Bible readers.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few possible explanations offered by scholars.
Okay.
Some suggest that Canaan might have been involved in the incident in some way,
Okay.
perhaps even instigating it.
Okay.
Others propose that Canaan inherited the consequences of his father's sin, highlighting the concept of generational curses.
That's really interesting. And then
Yeah.
what's interesting, too, is this curse that Canaan is to be a servant of servants.
Yes.
To his brothers. This kind of foreshadows what happens later
It does.
with the Canaanites.
Right, as the Canaanites become known for their wickedness, and they're eventually conquered by the Israelites.
So while the immediate context of the curse is Noah's family, it has these broader implications
He really does.
for the unfolding of God's plan in history.
Yeah, this final section of Genesis 9 is a complex and challenging one,
It is.
but it also offers valuable insights into human nature, the consequences of sin, and the interplay of grace and judgment in God's dealings with humanity.
Yeah. Amidst all the craziness, there's still this underlying message of hope
Absolutely.
because God's covenant remains in place.
Right, the rainbow still arches across the sky, a constant reminder of his faithfulness and mercy. And even in the midst of judgment, there's a glimmer of redemption.
Yeah.
As we wrap up Genesis 9,
Yeah.
I want to circle back to that idea of the rainbow
Okay.
as a symbol of God's faithfulness.
It's such a powerful image.
Isn't it? Think about how often we use the phrase rainbow of hope even today.
Yeah, it's true. It's just that universal symbol of, something positive coming out of something hard.
That's exactly what we see in Genesis 9. God establishes this covenant of hope and renewal after the devastation of the flood.
Yeah. And He marks it with this beautiful sign.
Yes, and it's a sign we can see and experience for ourselves.
Yeah.
Every time a rainbow appears in the sky,
Hmm.
it's like a little reminder from God saying, remember my promise.
Right.
I'm still here.
Yeah. I love that it's like those little sticky notes we leave for ourselves,
Right.
except it's written across the sky.
Exactly. And you know what else is interesting about the rainbow?
What's that?
It's formed by the combination of sunlight and rain.
Oh, yeah.
Two seemingly opposite elements working together to create something breathtaking.
That's a good point. It kind of reminds me of how God uses, what we see as bad things
Yes,
to create something beautiful and new.
absolutely. And that's something worth remembering when we face challenges in our own lives,
Yeah.
even when things seem dark and stormy. God is still at work weaving together seemingly disparate elements to create something beautiful and new.
So as we kind of come to the end of Genesis 9, what's the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think it boils down to this: even in the face of human brokenness and the consequences of sin, to God's grace and faithfulness endure. He's a God who keeps his promises
Yeah.
and who offers hope and renewal to all who seek him.
That's a great message to end on. So thank you for joining us on this journey
Yes,
through Genesis 9.
it's been a pleasure.
And we encourage you to keep exploring the scriptures, asking questions,
Yes.
seeking a deeper understanding of God's word
Mm-hmm.
and his incredible love for humanity.
Absolutely.
And until next time, may you find hope in the promise of the rainbow, and may your life be filled with God's grace and peace.
Amen to that.